I get it, so many NAS boxes look perfect on a product page, glossy photos of sleek metal and a promise of unlimited storage, but when they finally land on the rack you're left wondering if you've just paid for a fancy paperweight. I've spent the last week pulling apart a few rack mount units, reading the forums where sysadmins argue over fan curves, and watching the same setup in 5 minutes videos that usually end with a frustrated sigh. If you've ever hesitated because you're not sure whether the investment will actually simplify your workflow or just add another noisy brick to the server room, this review is for you. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the Synology RackStation RS820 Plus is positioned as a small to medium business solution, and that's exactly where its sweet spot lies. It's a 4-bay rack mount chassis, so you're not buying a desktop-style box you'll tuck under a desk. The design expects you to have a 19-inch rack, a UPS, and a dedicated network switch, basically the environment you'd already have if you're managing multiple workstations, a few virtual machines, or a growing media library. If you're already familiar with rack etiquette, cable management, proper airflow, and the occasional need to swap a drive without pulling the whole unit off the shelf, you'll feel right at home. If you're a hobbyist who just wants a couple of drives for family photos, you'll probably find this a bit overkill. One of the first practical things I tested was the actual installation process. The box arrives sealed, which is great for shipping safety, but it also means you need to slot in your own drives and memory. The drive bays slide out smoothly, and the tray mechanism is intuitive enough that you don't need a screwdriver for the first 4 drives. The memory module, however, is a 18 GB DDR4 stick that you have to snap in yourself. That's a small hurdle, but it's worth noting because the unit ships without any drives or RAM pre-installed. If you're not comfortable opening a chassis, you'll need either a tech-savvy friend or a professional to get it running, which adds to the total cost and time. Once the hardware was up, the real test began: the Synology Disk Station Manager, DSM, software. DSM is where the RS820 Plus earns its reputation. The OS boots up in under a minute on the Atom C3538 quad-core processor, and the dashboard immediately shows you storage usage, network traffic, and system health. What matters in day-to-day use is that the interface is web-based, so you can manage it from any laptop without installing a client. I set up a shared folder for a team of 6 designers, enabled real-time sync with their laptops, and turned on the built-in snapshot replication for critical project files. The snapshots ran in the background without noticeably slowing down the NAS, which is a practical win when you can't afford a bottleneck during a deadline crunch. Another scenario I tried was using the RS820 Plus as a Plex media server for a small office lounge. I added a 4K video library to one of the bays and let DSM transcode on the fly. The Atom CPU handled 1080p streams without dropping frames, but when I pushed a 4K HDR stream to 2 devices simultaneously, the CPU usage spiked to around 80%, and the video occasionally stuttered. In other words, the unit can serve high-definition content for a handful of users, but it isn't built to be a dedicated 4K streaming hub for a large team. If your primary need is media playback for a few workstations, you're fine. If you're planning to run multiple 4K streams 24/7, you might want a higher-tier model with a more powerful processor. The 4 1GB ports are a hidden strength. Many people assume you need a separate switch, but the RS820 Plus supports link aggregation, letting you combine 2 or more ports for increased bandwidth and redundancy. In my test, I bonded 2 ports and saw a measurable lift in copy speeds when moving large backup sets from a workstation to the NAS, roughly a 30% improvement over a single gigabit link. This is a practical benefit for anyone who backs up multiple machines nightly or runs a small virtualization environment that needs reliable network throughput. On the flip side, the power draw is something to watch. At idle, the unit consumes about 30 watts, which is reasonable for a rack mount box, but under load, especially when all 4 drives spin up and the CPU is busy with snapshots, the draw climbs to nearly 50 watts. Over a year, that adds up, especially if you're running the NAS in a data center where electricity costs are high. Pairing the RS820 Plus with an efficient UPS and setting power-saving schedules in DSM can mitigate the impact, but it's a trade-off you need to factor into your total cost of ownership. Now, let's talk about scalability. The chassis holds up to 48 terabytes of raw capacity for 12 terabytes drives, and you can expand beyond that with Synology's expansion units. For a growing business that expects to double its storage needs in the next couple of